Black here from Castle Black Gaming, and today I wanted to discuss a topic that has affected me personally and what I think might be a question on brand new players' minds who have sat on the sidelines for at least a year and maybe always, trying to see if New World was a game they wanted to partake in. The game has now been officially released for a year now, and I, like those watching this video, decided to sit out the released version of the game. Now I did play beta tests the year before and also 2 years before, so I had some experience with the initial game as it was originally conceived, that being mostly PvP oriented, but ultimately, when the game released last year, I decided not to join because I felt like it needed more time in the oven, and also it still felt like the devs themselves were not quite sure what they wanted this game to focus on. Now my predictions of the game not being ready for prime time were pretty much spot on, as we all bore witness to the rapid decrease in numbers with so many citing issues with the game, such as stale questing and the gold duping issues, but it's now been a year since release, and with the upcoming new free expansion to the map Brimstone Sands, is it the right time to go ahead and dip those toes into the game? Let's find out. So with all of the great and sometimes not so great content creators out there already, why should you listen to my opinion on whether or not to play New World? Now the first and foremost reason is that I am just a huge MMO fan at heart. Now I have not played every single MMO, and my playtime is not quite casual, as I do have quite a bit of free time most days and weekends, but I'm also not a die-hard, hardcore player who burns through content within a week or two and moves on like some sort of gaming locust. I like to take my time, savor the environment, gather and do crafting, or build or work on housing if that's something in a game, as it's in here in New World. Now, I'm not much into min-maxing, but more on the casual side of my builds, but will do what I can and research to see if I'm doing most of what most suggest, but I also enjoy just messing with my own builds. Now as I go along with the game, I like to make quick guides to help other players on things I think they might need help with, and I like to do so in a way that wastes as little time as possible and yet be packed with easily digested information with informative and pleasant to look at graphics. I have a career outside of gaming, so this is not my main focus, so you won't see me flooding your feed with tons of videos on sometimes useless things like a 5-minute game update that fixes minor issues. There's plenty of those out there. Basically, I like to help people, I enjoy MMOs, and I'm not a paid shill looking to make this my day job. Now let's talk about New World. So for those who are unsure what the game actually is, let me start off by saying it's basically a multiplayer online game that is somewhat of a mashup of a couple of genres, but mostly just what gamers call a theme-parked MMO, meaning that there's a main story questline you follow to get accustomed to some of the features of the game, and to get you moving from point A to B on the map in somewhat of a particular order. Now this does not mean that is the only way to play the game, and in fact you could get XP for doing many things. From what I've heard, you can completely level to cap by just crafting or gathering resources if that's your thing. But for most players, you will follow the storyline set forth and choose weapons which dictate your skills you will use in combat, and also allow you to focus earned skill points into specific enhancements to those weapons, making them perform better, whether that be more damage through crits or possibly even additional hits on enemies. So to be clear here, there's nothing groundbreaking about the use of weapons to dictate your sort of class, nor the use of skill points to further enhance your character. The game is a bit more freeing in this aspect than some, for instance allowing you to skip around and choose which enhancements you want for the most part, rather than being led down a tree to unlock this before that. Now if you're looking for a new MMO that is going to rewrite questing or combat, then that's not what New World is all about. But it does refine many of what other MMOs have done before it, and refine them pretty well for the most part. The style of combat is action-based, where you need to keep your target in front of you to land hits, versus some older MMOs that use tab targeting. Now I like both forms of combat and have seen games do both very well. This combat is more in line with ESO than, say, something like WoW. You get to swap weapons between two choices, which can give you some flexibility, but with your stats I noticed that you can be better off using two weapons that sort of make more sense together, such as the new greatsword and the bow, instead of two extremely distinctly different weapons like the great sword and say a healing staff. Now this is simply because dexterity, which is the stat that goes with both the bow and the great sword, along with strength, will kind of prop each other up instead of going with strength and the stat focus, which is what is recommended for the life staff. Now I think if you're not trying to min-max and just playing to have fun, you can be more experimental, but for those who are dead set on having their characters doing nothing but meme damage, which will be more important for those seeking a PvP route, more on this later, I think you'll be better served, at least in early game, with using weapon types that are more accommodating to one another. Respecking is an option though, and I think early on, as I am now, is a good time to just experiment to find which weapons you favor, and it's this sort of weapons experimentation that I really enjoy about games, and hopefully we see a good mix of weapons in use in groups, and not just one meta build that most people use. Alright, so if you've played any sort of non-sandbox based MMO such as WoW, Lord of the Rings Online, Elder Scrolls Online, or Final Fantasy, you should be used to how questing works in New World. In fact, it was the lack of early on questing back in the beta that made me not enjoy the game as much. Even last year, questing was not in as good a place as it is this year. The game has fixed tons of bugs, as you can see from this recent clip with the devs showing all of the bugs and new features and things added into New World this past year, which is quite a bit. Now, I hear there are still some issues that few players have concerns about, such as gold duping, which I think is finally fixed now, but who knows if it will return as a bug, and of course PvP zone rewards being too high and making players rich with little effort. But ultimately, I think the game is in a much better place, and with the new expansion also bringing in a new starting experience for new players, along with some new fresh start servers, I think now is the best time to get in and play. Now, I started a new character just a few days ago once I had decided that I would play when the update goes live October 18th. The leveling is felt on pace with many other MMOs, and the quest lines and available side quests have been interesting enough and not been so boring. I think the streamlining they have done for the early levels has worked and definitely made me want to keep going. The story is somewhat interesting, but does lack some of the finer storytelling that you'll see in games like Elder Scrolls Online and Lord of the Rings specifically, but those two IPs do have decades of materials to draw from. And from what I've heard about the story coming with the new desert region, there's no spoilers here, but I do like the mashup of various historical periods and having them being brought into this game world, so I do look forward to more of that. Alright, so if you're anything like me, you enjoy crafting. Now some do and some stay away from it, but I happen to be a huge crafter. Now for those of you who also enjoy crafting, I think you will like New World's crafting. Now I haven't done any of the endgame crafting, so this is from the point of view of someone who has learned the basics and heard about some of the later things you can do with it. A game that has good crafting to me is one that allows you to make decent gold, but also is engaging and allows you to craft things that are useful throughout leveling and not just endgame or not just at the beginning. Now I found myself crafting my own gear even early on because the items that drop from the quests are not enough to make you as good as you might need to be. Also, some games can handhold your early gear, making sure you're completely geared up from head to toe with everything you might need, but not so in New World. Just doing the quest did not even net me all of the light, medium, or heavy pieces one might need depending on their weapon use. As mentioned earlier, my main weapon was a greatsword, and I only had maybe 2 pieces of heavy gear from just questing, so I had to make an effort to be able to completely gear myself out with the type of armor that I needed. Now, for those who don't like crafting, you'll be able to buy gear from the trading shops in town, so you're still covered, and the prices, even on the PTR, were not bad, and I was able to fill out my gear needs there as well to buy a couple of pieces that were better than what I could actually make. Now, one thing I really liked was the ability to be able to make gear that can have better stats added, and you're going to be using rare items that you can pick up either through harvesting or in random crates that you come across. And there's even some tools or food that can help you receive those rare crafting items at a slightly higher chance. So again, there is quite a bit to the crafting, and I especially like that you are not locked into one particular crafting profession, and can apparently level all of them if you're so dedicated. Also, a quick note here about the gathering is visually visually, and the sounds are some of the best of any MMO, and even up there with most survival games I've played. You get trees that fall over and even slide down hills when they fall. You hear echoing as your pick or axe hits their targets, and it just adds a nice bit of background to what can be a mundane thing to do in some games. My only complaint about crafting was the lack of fiber around the Pridewind capital. I found some, but much less than the other resources, and I had to really make an effort to find what little I did. Just a minor complaint, but still a valid one, I think, for such a early needed crafting component that's not really special. Alright, so a game's difficulty can be dependent on a few things, such as how familiar or comfortable you are with this action style of combat versus, say, if you're used to tab targeting. Now, as I stated earlier, players coming from ESO will have no issue with this combat, whether it's making sure to face your enemies or swapping weapons. Players from tab targeting MMOs might find this form of combat a little difficult to get accustomed to, especially blocking and using position, but I think you'll also find it more freeing than tab targeting, where many ranged classes must stand still in order to pull off attacks that have longer skill inductions, which can make kiting enemies a little more difficult for those. Now, ultimately, how comfortable you are or get with this form of combat is going to dictate how difficult, or lack of, on most on-level mobs it is for you. Now, some of the boss fights you run into, or even stumble across like an alpha animal as I did here, can be a little more difficult, especially if you're not prepared. At this point, I had only been playing an hour or less, and I ran into this named boar, so instead of just breezing through it, as I had the other landscape boars, I suddenly found myself in a life or death fight, which almost cost me an embarrassing early level death. Now, had I not been as comfortable swapping stances or using directional combat, I probably would have died here, no doubt. Some of the bosses, or even some of the mobs you will find within camps that you'll be sent to, can have harder mechanics that you must pay attention to in order to survive or block when needed. Overall, after a few hours, you should really feel comfortable enough to find the difficulty not too hard as a solo player. But as for group activities, all I can say about those is that I've heard that they're pretty well done, and have even heard some say that they are some of their favorite of any MMO, so that's some pretty big, bold expectations to live up to, and something I'll comment on myself once I partake in some of these. So one of the largest complaints about New World at launch and in the ensuing months was that traveling on foot was just bad and not fun at all. Now, since then, quick travel points that are discoverable and which use a type of currency in order to use them have been implemented all over the map, and there are quite a lot of them, as you can see here. Now, while mounts are not yet in the game, I think we can safely say they are coming next year, since they have been confirmed as being something they're working on. Mounts are by far my favorite way to travel in MMOs, but I also like having options. Now, the markers are a nice enough option to start with, but I also enjoy having stable bot options where a player can ride from one town or point to another by dropping a little gold and being automatically shuttled off to their destination, and would like to see this implemented in New World. I think there's even room lore-wise for paying for flying type of mounts for even further travels, but I do not like load screens unless you're being flown into an area that already has a load screen to enter. I'm not a fan of player flying mounts either, so just having various mounts. Now, whether that be for quicker travels like between towns, or like I said, a flying type of machine, or even boat travels for longer distances, would be a welcome addition. Now, while mounts and quick travels are great and all, I do enjoy going around on foot, and most crafters will be doing this so they can be sure to gather and kill animals for hides as they go along. Staying on the road is definitely not a good way to increase your gathering or to find some of those rare plants and the ever elusive fiber that plagued my first 2 days playing. Yes, there is PvP. The game was initially founded on that bedrock, but as the updates and years have gone on, and as player feedback has been taken into consideration, it is but a hull of its former self and is completely optional. But your time within New World can be affected by it nonetheless, because there are wars that can be fought amongst the various factions that can affect your bonuses or buffs that you receive while in those areas. There are different types of PvP, such as doing duels with other players once you hit level 10. There's also open world PvP, which you can flag yourself to do or not. There's faction wars, where you take part in sieges to oust another faction from their settlement, and then there's also Outpost Rush, which is an instance PvP you can take part in once you're level 60, and you can queue up for it. Of course, you'll be able to receive special rewards and rare drops by participating in various PvP events, but again, it's not mandatory and just there as an option, which I honestly like having this instead of not, because there are some days where I just want to go experience full-out warfare, and I'm very much grateful that they made it optional, as I remember my last time in the beta where as a level 12, I kept getting killed by the same player at a much higher level than me over and over again while just trying to complete a mission, which was not fun. Alright, having not played through all of the game yet, I cannot answer about every gameplay feature and what it could be lacking. I can only go off of what I've experienced so far and compare it to other games I have played up until the same level. The early level gameplay is tons better than it was. Now, I would have liked to have been more clear when landing that I should or could make my own weapon before trying a mission that was combat oriented, such as killing those first boars or trying to go to a camp that has enemies in it. Now, I think I've seen somewhere where there should be plenty of weapons possibly laying around the ground to find, but I didn't see any, so I went over the campfire near the quest giver and just made my own weapon there, which beat trying to punch and kick boars to death, which is what I initially did. Now, I could have missed a dialogue that said how to get a weapon, or so that's on me, but it was still a moment where I was like, okay, if I didn't really know how the crafting worked, I might not have known what to do. Now, the fiber issue I mentioned earlier was also one that just didn't make sense. I found it easier to find iron and even silver before I found my first bit of hemp, so that felt lacking and kept me from being able to craft a bow or a fishing pole early on. Another thing I wish was different is how you currently unlock most of your recipes through leveling up your crafting, instead of being able to find recipes out in the world, whether that be from humanoid mobs or random crates or containers you could search in the world or in houses. I just like being able to find recipes that crafters need, especially rare ones that can be another form of income for players who like to sell rare loot without actually crafting. I'd like more of a reason to explore the landscape and cabins you come across out in the world. Having a base set of crafting recipes that unlock from reaching a certain crafting level, like the ability to craft level 20 greatswords when your crafting tier hits level 40 or whatever, would be fine. But having maybe fancier or even cosmetic recipes that could drop rare out in the world, allowing you to craft a different style of weapon if you had that recipe, would be a nice addition. Now, I don't want anything as overly done as ESO with their motifs here, but having some rare options that drop out in the world that players can learn themselves or sell to others is a nice way to keep players busy and even going through older areas they might not be going to anymore. I mentioned my travel desires in that section of the video, so I won't go into them more here. More travel options are always nice, and even having summoning classes or teleporting classes is also nice. I don't think New World has those, so I tacked those on here, but if they are in game already, just let me know down below. Now, a larger issue that I think has gotten better from what I've heard is the AI awareness. There were times when I did not quite trigger NPCs, which you can see in some of my footage a few times. This happened with NPCs that were on my level or at my level, and also it happened whether it was animals or actually humanoids, so that tells me that it's just an AI issue overall. Now, as I said, I hear it's better than it was, but there were too many times whenever I was able to get close enough to hold for a heart attack and land the hit before they actually recognized me. The last thing New World needs is some sort of transmog, or for other MMOs out there, a way to wear whatever armor or cosmetics that you want while retaining the stats from your top earned armor. Now, this is a must for any multiplayer MMO game, especially when cosmetics are in the game or just armor that you find that fits you and your sense of style. Otherwise, you get 50 players in a zone all wearing the exact same thing because they want their best armor on while playing. Now, from what I found in the forums, this feature was asked for months ago and already been replied as one the devs are working on. Hopefully this is a feature that comes sooner rather than later, as it's almost a release feature for most games at this point. I have found some very cool looking armor pieces early on and head armor that I hated having to give up because the newer armor piece simply did not look as stylish or what my idea of a washed up on the beach pirate should look like. Oh yeah, and one other thing too, the greatsword needs more looks than the couple that I've seen so far. And by couple, I've basically just seen one, but I think I've seen a picture of one on one of the official dev spots. Anyway, I got a new greatsword, and yet it still looks like my first, and the one I see everyone else in their videos using. There needs to be just as many weapon varieties or close to it as there are armor looks in the game. Alright, and I think that's going to do it for this video. This was meant as a primer for those who were interested, and I hoped it helped you make your mind one way or the other. This game does a lot right, and is very polished and feels modern, which is something we don't get very often with MMOs. The map I traveled on felt pretty big, and you definitely can see why travel is needed, and I did not even get into the new area yet, which looks amazing, and I'm a huge fan of desert areas in games. Now, if you're not one of those who enjoys the mad rush at launch, then I could see waiting a month. The game will probably be on sale around Black Friday anyway, and I picked mine up in September for $20, so that was definitely a good buy. I don't know how much time I will get out of New World, but for the price and the fact that it's continuously being worked on, and even the fact that the new expansion is free, says to me that Amazon is not hurting for money on this game and is looking to add to it. Now, if I get 4 to 6 months of good gameplay out of this, I'll consider it a pretty big achievement, and after just a month, I think it will definitely pay for itself in entertainment value. Now, I would say to give it a shot, and you might even want to play on one of those new fresh servers when they go live so you can get a sense of community and to all be on a level playing ground. Now remember to be kind to your fellow gamer, allow things to breathe and simmer because sometimes it pays off to wait and stay positive citizens.